The Big Picture Revealed Show, Episode 1. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tyson. The big picture revealed is about the bigger picture, and we're not simply talking about the national picture. We're not even simply talking about the global picture, but those focuses will become a part of the show, especially in terms of their synchronicity regarding astrological cycles. My goal with the big picture revealed is to share insights that are astrological, astronomical, cosmological, philosophical, spiritual, metaphysical, and so on. So we're really after the much bigger picture, what has been described in some respects in different ways as the perennial philosophy, and just the deeper look at who we are, why we are, and more specifically, in terms of my focus as an astrologer, how astrology plays a role in our understanding of that, both individually and collectively. And that's what get that. So there's a lot of links that I'm going to create between these various disciplines and show how they ideally, in a more holistic worldview, speak to one another. As it is,
Well, that's,
yeah,
I was just going to say that's very exciting. As it is, these are seen as separate realms, and this is the opportunity to bring them all together in a new, well, let's call it a cosmological order.
that's a good way of looking at it. Yes, they are. It's just part of our educational system that we naturally tend to categorize things, and that has its place. And it's good to draw lines and boundaries where they belong. But just like the boundaries, the borders in the world, they're artificial. It doesn't really mean that there's separation and division, but what happens within various fields of study, there emerges sort of an exclusivity, a superiority, a hubris, an attitude of we know and you don't know. And that kind of thinking has prevailed for some time now. That's really, in many respects, it's rather ancient, but especially in our more modern era where knowledge is more available, it ironically remains somewhat true. Although those, just like our borders, are progressively fading and dissolving, the same is true as this emerging cosmology, as you say, a new cosmological order brings forward all of what have those fields of study that have been held suspect by the scientific paradigm are remaining to be strong and prevalent, and they furthermore are breaking their way back in to what in effect became closed doors. And the question, among the many questions we can ask, is why were those doors closed? And it starts.
Yeah, let's use an example. I know two of your passions are astrology and astronomy. So there's an example of, as we move to a more holistic paradigm, you can maybe use that as an example of what you're beginning to refer to.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tyson. Astronomy is, of course, at the foundation of many things, and it's a very wonderful science of observation and measurement, and it supports us understanding how the world works and how we stand in relationship to the larger cosmos, etc. From it, we have everything from navigation to almanacs, astrology, calendars, clocks, all of those, astrology, almanacs, navigation, calendars, and clocks, can be seen to be sort of almost like, in a certain kind of language, aspects of the astronomical science. Okay. And they each, are a beautiful expression and a practical usage of knowledge. And so astrology, out of all of those four, is of course the most esoteric. Where each of the disciplines mentioned, and calendars and clocks and timing is its own fine art of science. I'll call it a fine art of science. It's a precise science. Knowing what time it is, for example, is a precise aspect of astronomy. So an astronomer will tell you, yes, there's many branches of astronomy. The same is true, actually, of astrology. There's many systems of astrology. But what I'm really wanting to say here is where the almanac uses the information of astrology in a more mechanical way. And that's true also of navigation and clocks and calendars. They're all mechanical, linear, physics-based. That's really exciting and important to understand. Okay. Astrology takes the astronomy and brings in a few other factors like the psychology of perception. This is really important to understand that we, of course, know now logically, factually, that the sun is at the center of the solar system, but that is not how we experience it, nor is it how we will ever experience it. So the experiential perceptual reality brings in a psychological component. We can talk about consciousness and so forth. Now, so we, therefore, from an astrological perspective, recognize this subjective perception reality, this psychological reality, which can be also linked to spiritual, but we'll get to that later. We recognize that although the sun does not orbit the Earth, it appears that way. Although the planets do not orbit the Earth in the solar system, it appears that way. So that apparent reality really has a deep impact on us, for a variety of reasons. Among them, inasmuch as species have evolved over time as a part of call it a divine design, that's what I'll call it, an intentional divine design. We as a species, and all species on the planet, in effect, have evolved within the context of the astronomical reality. Although the physics of astronomy will say, yes, the sun has an influence on the Earth, and yes, the moon has an influence on the Earth, we're not so sure about the planets, and to turn the physics of the planets into some metaphysical theory called astrology, well, from an astronomical point of view, that's just bogus. An astrologer would say, well, okay, well, let's begin with the fact that when you take the astronomy, you plot the sun, moon, and planets on a chart, now you have done something very special. You have transferred the astronomical reality onto an astrological mandala. A mandala has a scientific basis. It's basically a circle with a cross in it, which represents north, south, east, west, compass points, right? Okay. And then each can be seen as representing a season, spring, summer, fall, winter, and or an element, earth, air, fire, and water, in whatever order you want to put them. But they do have direct correspondences, by the way. The directions, the seasons, and the elements have, proper direct correspondence, just to be clear on that. And the point is, when you take the astronomy and you plot it on a mandala, this sort of something magical occurs. Something magical in terms of a type of science, I'll call it science, a type of shift of understanding, or call it an opportunity to measure relationships between those planets. Now, you have to bring in not just the planets, you have to bring in the time of day, the seasonal round, which is linked to the axial tilt of the Earth at that particular time, because it appears to always be in motion, never static. So the long and short of it is, when you plot planets, the astronomy, when you take the astronomy of astrology and you plot it on a map, it is no longer astronomy. It is no longer astronomy. Now it is astrology, and the astrology recognizes that it starts to and does reveal an intimate story of who we are, how we are by our temperament, but personality, and literally goes into the timing of our life. And that's where the word synchronicity emerges. So you see, basically speaking, the science of astronomy, when applied in the astrological way, becomes metaphysics. Metaphysics meaning not above astronomy, not better than astronomy, just another interpretation of existence incorporating astronomy.
I love that explanation. Really, what it brought to mind to me is, as soon as we start to plot it on the mandala, we're really now describing the relationship between the planets and the stars in the heavens, and our relationship to that in terms of sacred geometry. We're really now having the geometry that comes forth, which you don't necessarily get from astronomy itself. So yeah, I can see how powerful that is.
It's the sacred geometry definitely comes forward, you're right, in an archetypal way. Just for a quick moment, and I'd like to return back to that point, is it's a theme of relationship between the collective of beings on the planet, but more specifically, we are referring to human beings who are the beings and species on the planet interested in their astrology. So regarding astrology, we're talking about a relationship of us and time and space. And the space is that relationship between the Earth specifically and the sun, moon, and planets. It's very particularly placed, and there is a certain high degree of constancy, as an astronomer will tell you, despite subtle and long-range variability, very, very, very incremental, etc., but largely very stable and consistent. So we have this relationship. Now, one more quick thing here is that traditionally the astronomical model rephrase, the scientific model asserts an attitude of objectivity. Okay, it endeavors to bring things to a factual or an objective factual level, and that's really valid. It's a good and important endeavor. But the fact of the matter is, it is all subjective, all perception, all existence. Everything is subjective. So I like to I have a phrase that goes like this: objectivity is the illusion we're experiencing together. Objectivity is an illusion. It's only relatively true. It's not an absolute truth. And that's what Einstein's all about, and the experience of time and so on, and the march of science to achieve a pure objectivity is something that has been frustrated a century ago, let alone decades, but it's one that appears to be unaccepted entirely yet, because, okay, we can push the envelope to achieve higher and higher or more precise levels of objectivity, and there's nothing wrong with that, and it's valid, but we must not assume that it's absolute, because it's not. And subjectivity is, and what emerges, what subjectivity means, among other things, is two basic things I'll mention, two basic principles: conditioning and bias. That's them. Conditioning If you're
Yeah.
educated in a certain way, you are conditioned to think a certain way. If you're conditioned to assume that your thoughts are objective, you might assume your thoughts are objective. What that
Yeah,
produces
this is a
is bias.
philosophical question.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to interrupt at this point is, I have a great passion and interest in the history and philosophy of science. And even the concept of objectivity is not rational. There is no such thing, as you would say, as objectivity. It's a fiction.
Yes.
It's not even possible. By the mere fact that you're saying you're objective, you've already changed what it is you're looking at by the mere fact that you've looked at it. And so this is the new science that's emerging that is really bridging that two worlds that have been separate between the metaphysical or spirituality and science as the detached observer. There is no such thing. So the exciting thing is we're now learning how to see this from two different aspects, sort of like from the left brain and the right brain. And hopefully we end up with a whole brain way of seeing it.
Exactly.
And that's the science I like about you is you really are doing this holistically. That's what's in front of your astrology. Holistic astrology.
It is holistic. Holism is reality because holism implies ultimately unity of all things. That there are no divisions, and separation and division has its place as a mode of perception, but it should not be considered conclusive. It's like, for example, say that space is empty. Then you might say, well, maybe, but there might be vast tracts of empty space. But how could space be empty when it's filled with galaxies? So galaxies each have their relative independence to each other, but they're collectively galaxies. So there's a common denominator to their existence. And so one could just go there basically, and we can entertain concepts that are linked back to interpretation. And this is where we get back to conditioning or programming and bias. By the way, in astrology, it's the same as the principle of yin and yang, which is also a holistic philosophy where the recognition of the two polarities, whether they be light and dark, up and down, here and there, you and I, hot and cold, and every other, are seen as two ends of the same pole, which are intimately woven and naturally interact constantly. It's not anomalous, it's a constant, just as is true of synchronicity. And in this constancy, astrologically, there are actually three basic ways you can categorize people. You have solar types, lunar types, and solilunar types. Solar types are very, very logical, very yang, very fact-oriented, outer-directed, achievement-oriented, proactive. So there's nothing wrong, it's positive. Okay, there's a lot of positivity in the solar principle, that's for sure. Lunar is more reflective, reactive, instinctual, emotional, not factual, inner directed, etc. So there's a difference between those. Somebody who's ultra solar does not see themselves. They see everything but themselves. Somebody who's ultra lunar are drowning in themselves. It's a slightly different, they're both highly imbalanced at worst. The solar would have a pure solar mind, would probably have no conscience practically. There would be no feeling. It would be mechanical. Purely lunar would be chaotic. It would be a mess. It would just be endless reaction. And this is, practically lunacy, insane asylums. Okay, so one is the psychopath and one's in the insane asylum. And we see that in the world. The psychopaths are actively, imprisoning the lunatics, kind of thing. And it's this model. Now, of course, simply putting it, the solely lunar is an ideal to be balanced, like as if we were balanced by left and right brain. Most people are more in the middle, solely lunar. But of course, you can be 70-30. You can possibly, if you were 70-30, would be in the beginning of an imbalance. Edging there, it's like, oh, 70%. But actually, that would be more common than we think. And it's actually also the popular mainstream model, which is producing a conditioning. It's a conditioning to be more solar. Okay, so what's happening? So in a funny sort of way, the entire alternative metaphysical movement that's emerging right now is in revolution. It's trying to say, come over to say, hey, there's an imbalance here. Here, just to get the picture right, we're out of sync. This is not healthy. And an extreme solar would be, Hunger Games fascism. A highly rationalized psychopathic attitude and behavior. And that's the big concern on our planet. So that's where this is where some of what I, in the big picture, want to bring forward is some of these human condition issues, by the way. So just jumping there. So we have that yin yang, solar lunar, sun moon parallel. And these are some of the insights that I want to develop, and I want to reveal how they play a role in our everyday life. I call the astrology natural psychology. It's nature's psychology. And we need to, looking at the world and how it is, with everything from transhumanism, which asserts a kind of an attitude and or colonizing Mars. There's a type of mindset that's asserting that this is what we should and must do. Meanwhile, what we, perhaps the lunar mind might say, what we should and must do is take care of the planet, and we're a mess down here. While we're busy thinking of solving our problem by going to Mars, we're not really, empathizing with the suffering that's going on here. So this is where it gets, the human condition is in a mess due to the exclusivity of the mindset, as we said at the beginning. And ironically, for all that science has and does give us, and it does give us a great deal, it actually, at worst, is the culprit. Because it presents a highly linear solarized model and a conclusion attitude, which is a type of assumed objectivity. And so it gets, the revolution of astronomy or science, which stood up against the dogma of the church, thank you very much, has at worst become the tyranny as a philosophy. So people will often say in their defense of their position, well, the science. Well, okay, the science, fair enough. But, the science, if you don't challenge that position, then the science becomes a religion. That's what it becomes.
Yes, it becomes the dogma.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes a dogma.
So, Michael,
the attitude is.
So where are we going with it?
Huh?
Where are we going with this? I mean, this is exciting. Like, we're going to do the big picture, and we're going to do that. And then we have other levels that are going to be revealed as we move along. So could you talk about the other aspects about what the series is going to involve?
Well, you see, the whole idea is to present what I'm going to call positive provocation. Provocation is think. Let's think about this again. Let's ask questions. Let's understand the holistic model Let's look for the connections between various fields and endeavors of study. Let's look at who we are, how we are, why we are, the way we think, if we're conditioned. As I said, I was just saying a moment ago, the attitude traditionally in the modern era is, I'm a scientist, therefore my perspectives are objective. It's like, wrong. No. Okay. You orient yourself to the empirical model of perceptual facts. Fair enough. We understand that. But is that all there is to your psyche? No, that is not. And so what I'm after here is to use this position of leveraging to open the mind. Open the mind. Let's get past assumption, the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word, always do your best. Make no assumptions and don't take it personally. Make no assumptions means make no assumptions, but what they mean is most people trip over those 4 principles regularly. So if we don't acknowledge that we probably do, we can't acknowledge that, yeah, we probably do make assumptions. We probably do take it personally often or see it subjectively. And we aren't always impeccable with our word. And we don't always do our best. And what does doing our best mean exactly? Exactly what does it mean? Okay. So, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like a judgment on anybody. It's just that model is meant to remind us what we tend to do as human beings, right? That's a Toltec philosophy that has been brought forward in the past, decade or so, perhaps a little longer, maybe the last 20 years, that 4 agreements. But anyway, make no assumption. So what we're talking about is a dialogue, a discussion that's meant to challenge assumptive thinking, matter-of-fact conclusions. And the goal is to, once we open our minds to realizing that we are making assumptions, then we can start to enter into discussions of seeing things differently that are right in front of us. It's like they can't be seen because it's not a part of the paradigm. And it's right in front of us. And it's a rather almost serious. I'll say almost serious because, although there's a lot of heroic actions coming from every field of endeavor on the planet, scientific, metaphysical, spiritual, social, and otherwise. So it's all good. There's good people everywhere doing all, and some of them are admittedly exclusive in their focus, whether it's scientific or, more in the sociological or whatever it might be, metaphysical. It remains that, each have their place and value, but the tendency as humans, once again, is to enter into this notion of, superiority, exclusivity. Now, just wait a couple more things. If we boil that down, what we're going to see is advantage. We're going to see ego and advantage in the marketplace. Because, if I go and, I'm committed to, or I'm studying this, or, then therefore, it's a bit of subconscious elbow and fear-based marketing, monopolizing. Monopolizing is probably the key word. Let's monopolize the airwaves. Let's monopolize the educational system. Let's monopolize everything. It's fear-driven attitudes. So all of this is a type of, the whole goal here is this positive provocation of asking questions is meant to open the mind and break the trance of assumed objectivity. Like, the assumed objectivity can be defined as, I see things as they are. Reality, no. You see things as you are. And so it gets into these areas like, in a metaphysical or more spiritual model, there's a saying, being awake to being awake. What does that mean? It means that you're aware that there's a thing called being awake. And what does that mean? That means that you recognize that you don't see things as they are. So in other words, when you see that you don't see things as they are. Now you see things as they are. That's the funny thing. As soon
And
as
then
you,
this is going to lead.
this is going to lead to.
This is going to lead. Sorry, we're having the repetition. This is going to lead to the weekly astrological update.
Oh yes, of course. Yes, thank you for that. Of course. So this entire show is meant to be that like a let's think about this carefully and let's reconsider what we assume. That's all. I will present it in the best way I can, and just simply speak in terms of the realities of subjective perception and interpretation. Which that's the largely that, and I will present it as recognizing that I'm awake to the realization that I see things as they are because I realize that I don't see things as they are. I'm not, therefore, locked into a narrow bias. I can see holistically how the various different aspects of human endeavor and inquiry have links, and it's only a monopolizing attitude that wants us to think anything else. It must be a monopolizing, fear-based, some kind of control somewhere, wherever that exists, whoever and wherever it comes from, within the human condition or within, which, can be more specifically defined as various groups. So with that larger understanding, a part of the objective is to bring forward a clear appreciation, for example, specifically of how and why astrology works. It'll be indirect. We're not going to talk specifically about the mechanics of astrology. We're not very much. We're not going to be teaching astrology. We're only going to be talking about a holistic worldview in which all various disciplines from astronomy to astrology and everything in between belong. They all belong, and they all have a place, and none need feel threatened by the other when recognized and appreciated for what they are on their own ground. Now, another branch of, as we're going to do, what I'll be doing is a segment, which is a new branch of my work, which I've been doing horoscopes and tips of the weeks and newsletters for many years. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to weave the newsletters and the tips of the week into a presentation of just showing the astrological weather report. Where are the planets? And I'm going to do that in a graphic way by showing an astrology chart. And in that process, there's going to be a certain amount of education about how it works. And I'll have other supporting videos, by the way, that will be, pieces that I'll generally encourage. Check out that one, check out the others to get some background on this point. So people will have this opportunity to learn the deeper, bigger picture behind the astrology and just touch on the mechanics without having to get rote and, particular, and they don't have to become an astrologer. Okay, so the big picture revealed is just that, a kind of a celebration of thinking in a holistic way to open the minds. The other segment is about an astrological look at what's going on this week, this month, this year, and that particular segment can have larger and smaller scopes, like big cycles. So I'll largely be doing it regularly per week, but I'm going to splice into it larger cycles of time, everything from the age of Aquarius and what's called the Great Year. So that will be exciting for people to be able to learn again about this way of thinking and understanding. Then what we'll do in the next is the third stage or phase of this whole focus is to provide people with live horoscope or astrological updates each week for each sign of the zodiac, and I'll explain why each sign can be read individually. So there'll be that, and that will be something that people can access, but there'll probably be a subscription fee for that by the time we're there. and which, you know, shouldn't be long now. But so it's the 3-segment project we have here. The first two, the bigger picture, and then the more immediate picture, and various synchronicities will be discussed, especially in this particular program, in terms of world and current events, etc. But the astrology is where you take it home on a very personal level. And by the way, more a little important point, as an astrologer, I'm very interested in the process of supporting what should be called realization of destiny or self-actualization, which is very practical. And what it does is it takes fluffy notions of spirituality and kind of what really I myself might categorize as woo-woo, and says, okay, that's kind of half-baked, not really knowing what you're talking about sometimes, often. What we really need to understand is we're here on purpose. We're in the body, on the planet, on purpose, and our purpose invariably is to engage in a co-creative process. Call it, and you know, then we can talk about the drama of life, you know, but some of the drama in the school of life may be understood to be unnecessary. Like we could collectively, due to our paradigms and fixed opinions and notions, maybe we're making it more difficult than we have to. But when we say we're here on purpose, it brings forward that the journey of our life invariably requires a reality on the planet which is not utopian, which is invariably one which recognizes that, you know, there's going to be the interplay of forces, you know, light and dark, pleasure and pain, what we call good and bad, advantage and disadvantage, what have you. It's going to remain the human drama. No amount of wishful thinking, no amount of the golden age is going to happen tomorrow. No amount of kind of euphoric, grandiose sort of promises that's just complete nonsense, that I think. There's complete nonsense going on out there. The golden age is going to happen in a year, you know, or the opposite extreme, the world's about to be desecrated to the, you know, we're about to be reduced to, you know, insect level, you know, we're about to be crushed because we don't believe in some deity. You know, there's a lot of nonsense going on, I think. And so my hope is to, with this kind of stretching the parameters of our perceptions and our emotions and our beliefs, and to try and bring it down to a level of being here now as a human being. It's the whole thing.
Right. Sounds very exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. It's fun. It's my, as an astrologer, as I mentioned in some of our previous shows, Tyson, I'm a humanistic astrologer, which means I'm a person-centered astrologer. I'm like, who are you? Why are you here? Merely purely predictive astrology is fortune telling. That is just, it's an important branch of astrology to be able to predict probabilities, but we should as much be voting for and emphasizing possibility. And that's where we get back full round circle to what you were hinting at before, by the way, and I think it's very accurate, is where we get into as a human being, where we weave in our co-creative intentionality, right? Our co-creative intentionality to both create our lives in a healthy way, but also in doing so, almost invariably have an attitude of contribution to the collective.
Thank you very much. This is a great introduction to where we're going and what we're going to do. So as we move forward, this will be a weekly show.
Yes.
We're not absolutely don't have it nailed down, but it seems as though it will be every Wednesday, most likely somewhere around 1 p.m. Pacific time. Right. Will be the broad brush of the big picture being revealed. There will also be then a link over to the Extraordinary Healing Arts Academy, where you can start to do the deeper dive, where you can get your weekly overview, your astrological update, and then you can go deeper into what does this actually mean for you. So from the big picture to the more personal application of what do I do with all this information, down to actually having the opportunity to meet one-on-one with Michael and really get clear, what does this mean for me on a very personal astrological level? Where am I? How do I show up and be the best that I can be? So I'm very excited about this series. We got lots of opportunity to do lots of exploration in many of my favorite fields of endeavor: science, philosophy, astrology, astrological phenomena, moons, planets, stars. I mean, it just sounds pretty exciting. So I'm looking forward to this. So until next week, bye for now. So any last words, Michael, before we sign off?
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Tyson. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and look forward to sharing more with you in the weeks and months to come. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Bye for now, everybody.